In the British suburbs of the 1950s, 60s and 70s, a familiar sight would have been the figure of a local constable making his steady beat through the neighbourhood. He was not a man in a hurry, nor one obsessed with paperwork and procedure, but rather a steady, old-school presence whose duty was as much about reassurance as it was about enforcement. This sort of bobby embodied a way of policing that belonged to the community itself, a watchful neighbour in uniform rather than a distant figure of authority. His day would begin with the simple act of walking. Unlike the modern patrol car, his boots on the pavement were his most vital tool, and every step mattered. People recognised the sound of those boots on the pavement, and they would glance out of their windows, nodding as he passed, comforted by his presence. Shopkeepers greeted him as he lingered by their doorways, checking all was well. He would exchange a word with the butcher about the price of lamb, or with the grocer about the new assistant he had just taken on. His uniform presence discouraged petty theft far better than a stern warning after the fact. Children too found him approachable. If a boy fell from his bicycle and grazed his knee, the constable would be down on one knee himself, fishing a handkerchief from his pocket and giving a few steadying words before walking the lad home. In an age before mobile phones, a local bobby knew every household and could be relied upon to fetch a doctor, summon a parent, or simply providing a calming word when tears threatened to overwhelm. He remembered names, birthdays, even the odd small triumph from school sports days, which made youngsters felt they mattered. For the elderly, he was a vital lifeline. For many lived alone, their children having moved away to new council estates or suburbs further afield. The constable would pause at the gate, tip his hat politely, and ask whether the heating coal had been delivered or whether the milkman had been. If a latch was stiff or a garden gate had come off its hinge, he would lend his strong arm to right the matter. Sometimes he would bring in the post, chatting for a few minutes, his presence breaking up the long silence of an afternoon. Even disputes were handled with a gentler touch. A row between neighbours about overhanging branches or noisy wireless sets would not be met with stern officialdom, but with patient listening. The bobby would hear both sides, nod gravely, and suggest a compromise that allowed tempers to cool. His authority was not in threats or fines, but in the trust the community placed in him. To be spoken to by the local constable carried more weight than any formal charge. He had an eye for the vulnerable and the wayward. A lad loitering too long outside a tobacconist might feel a hand on his shoulder and hear the quiet suggestion that he find himself a more wholesome pursuit. A girl heading home too late from a dance might find herself escorted for safety's sake, the constable making certain no harm came her way. In both cases, the message was clear. He was there to watch, to guide, and to care. In moments of true need, he became something more. A house fire, A traffic accident or a sudden illness in the street called for swift, steady action. Without fuss, he would summon the fire brigade or the ambulance, direct onlookers, and stay until the crisis had passed. Yet even then his manner remained calm, a still centre around which panic could subside. By the time his day's beat ended, he had woven a quiet thread through the lives of dozens of people. His service was not dramatic, nor was it marked by headlines or medals. It was the steady accumulation of small, helpful acts, such as opening a gate, comforting a child, easing a quarrel, and lending a hand, that defined his role. This was policing as the art of presence, of being there, of embodying the reassuring idea that someone watched over the ordinary rhythms of suburban life. Old school indeed. And in its own way, irreplaceable. And in our hurried modern world, we could do with policemen and policewomen of this kind once again. Officers who wear the uniform not simply for a wage, but as a pledge to their neighbours, whose care and quiet humanity would do more for a community's spirit than all the patrol cars and paperwork ever could. They stand as quiet symbols of the best of British life. Duty without fanfare. Service without expectation of reward. And a steady belief that the safety of ordinary people is the true measure of a nation's strength. In their watchfulness and kindness, we glimpse the values that have long defined our country: decency, fairness, and an unspoken promise that no one is ever entirely alone while the bobby walks his beat. Did you know a bobby like this when you were growing up? Share your memories below. I'm Douglas Winchester, author and lifelong student of the stories that make us who we are. If this film spoke to you, please subscribe and share it with anybody who remembers the old beat or wishes that they had.